This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
This is the My Campaign Coach podcast with Raj Schaefer. Today we have on with us Drew Ryun, son of the legendary Kansas Miler and Congressman Jim Ryun, former Deputy Political Director of the RNC, and among the many political hats he wears today, Drew is the Executive Director of the Madison Project PAC. Drew, thank you for joining us today.
Anytime, Raz. Glad to be with you.
It's a pleasure. For those that are listening, we actually work very close together to this day. Our history together goes back a little bit over 7 years now. Drew actually was my first boss coming out of Hillsdale College. He hired me or offered me a job 2 days before I graduated and saved my butt from going and camping out on my parents' couch. So for that, Drew, I am forever grateful and appreciate that saving grace. Since that time, we've worked together pretty much nonstop. I worked for Drew for 3.5 years doing PAC, C3, and C4 work, candidate training, activist training that really whetted my appetite for what we're doing now at My Campaign Coach. And we've been partners on a number of ventures along the way. So it's been a wild and crazy, but a lot of fun ride.
It has been. And, the fun thing is, Raz, is to see how you've excelled. And I know that there was that curiosity of who is this guy calling me from Texas to hire me, and I have to graduate from Hillsdale. But you came highly recommended. And I have to say that the product met the billing. So that's always nice.
Well, I'm glad. It's definitely been a learning experience, I think, for both of us, and got quite a bit done. So now fill in, I gave a quick introduction there, fill in a little bit more about your backstory and kind of how you and, I guess, bigger picture, your family got involved in politics and what motivated you to kind of follow in some of those footsteps.
Yeah, so the Ryun family has always been involved in politics. I remember when I was 10, 11 years old, stamping envelopes for local candidates in Lawrence, Kansas, doing block walks, you name it, we did it. My dad endorsing a lot of local candidates, state reps. But it really wasn't until 1996 when a lot of dominoes fell. And in that year, Bob Dole was running for president. He was one of the sitting U.S. senators in Kansas. He jumped up to run for president, won the nomination. Sam Brownback at the time was the sitting congressman from the 2nd Congressional District. He decided, hey, it's an open Senate seat. I'm going to go for it. So he jumped up to run for Senate, which left the 2nd Congressional District of Kansas as an open seat scenario. There are two things that my dad, Jim Ryun, said he would never do: become a track coach or run for political office. So oddly enough, as he was running the Olympic torch across Kansas at an event in Wichita, Kansas, one of the then congressmen, Todd Tiahrt, saw him on stage during the event and said, hey, Jim, there's an open seat scenario in Kansas too. You've got tremendous name ID. You should think about running for it. And my dad told him no. And here's where the story gets interesting. Is my dad driving home from Wichita back to our home in Lawrence, he said the wheels started turning and I started thinking, well, maybe this is a God-given opportunity, a door opening that I thought I'd never go through. And I remember we had breakfast that next morning as a family, and Dad said, I told him no, but I have to tell you, I've been thinking about it. I've been praying about it. I think I might do it. So he took a couple of days, thought about it some more, prayed about it some more. And before we knew it, he had tossed his hat into the ring, and we won what was one of the more interesting elections that year in 1996. A lot of people remember the wave election of 1994. 1996, we had a 3-way primary. Dad won that one. Going into the last couple of weeks of the general election, we were down 7.5 points and ended up squeaking that one through. And Dad served for 10 years in Congress. My introduction there was basically I would intern over the summers back in Washington, D.C. And I remember distinctly in 1997 thinking, maybe I do want to do a little bit in politics. But it wasn't until 2002 when I had graduated from college. I was back in Washington, and a friend of mine, Timmy Teeple, who was an advisor for Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal. At the time, he was a deputy director at the RNC. He said, hey, we're trying this new product called Voter Vault, and we're going to play in 7 races this fall, 6 Senate seats and 1 House race. And I was given the choice to go either to Minnesota or to Missouri. I chose Missouri, and I recruited a team of 100 homeschool kids. And we implemented, which I think was probably one of the better get out the vote programs that I've ever done. And I'm an English and history major in college, no real experience in politics other than my dad's campaigns. We ended up helping win that election by 1.4%. And the rest, they say, is history. I really had my appetite whetted. I was, again, an English and history major with no real practical experience in politics, I wasn't even really a numbers guy. The one subject I hated the most growing up was math, but I seem to have a knack for what I call electoral math. You break down precincts and counties. That's the kind of thing I loved. And, since then, I worked as a deputy director at the Republican National Committee in the 03-04 cycle, ran government affairs for a great guy named Jay Sekulow in the American Center for Law and Justice. We were in the middle of a lot of Supreme Court nomination battles. Also ran government affairs for the United Nations for Jay Sekulow and the International Court of Human Rights in the International Parliament there in Strasbourg, France. So it's been a wild ride. As you mentioned, I now do a lot with Madison Project. Also wear a couple of other hats.
That's fantastic. I appreciate that overview. And part of what you really taught me how to do, especially early on, was through the work with American Majority and training candidates and activists. Our whole goal and our goal here at My Campaign Coach now is we want to help prepare the ground, the farm team of candidates that are going to be city council and school board guys now, but that eventually are going to go up there through those ranks. And you're familiar both from your history training as well as seeing your dad, come up and run for Congress, the necessary traits as far as preparation that these candidates, the things they need to do in order to have this deck stacked in their favor. But what are some of the most important things that you see that candidates really need to have squared away when they're looking to run?
Well, just real quickly and kind of building off what you just said, and then I'll answer the question. I think for the conservative movement, we oftentimes allow election cycles to run up on us, and all of a sudden we're being reactive instead of proactive. And I think the idea of having a farm team, multiple election cycles in advance of big elections, I think is critical for the conservative movement. And, I think for a lot of people that want to run for office, getting to your question, I think the first thing is you've got to look for an entry level into politics where you actually have a chance of winning. Also coupled with the idea of if you first run for office, there's a really good chance you won't win the first time around. But the guys that come back for a second time, their likelihood of winning often goes up dramatically. And, I tell a lot of first time candidates, whether you want to know it or not, the mother's milk of politics is what kind of money can you raise? Look, as conservatives, I have long preached, we don't need to have as much money as, say, an establishment type candidate or running against a Democrat. If we can organize, we can beat these guys. But I think the thing that's critical is you have to have some money in politics. And anytime I talk to a candidate who says, you know what, I'm going to win, a congressional seat with $50,000, I'm like, no, you're not. You and I both know, living here in Texas, Raz, you probably couldn't, you might be able to win a city council race with $50,000, but you're not going to win a state house race. You're not going to win a state senate race. So, I think the beginning thing for a lot of first-time candidates is what kind of money can you raise? And then actually putting a game plan in place. And a lot of people don't sit down and just say, you know what, I'm going to give a couple days and I'm going to create some infrastructure. I'm going to create the structure of a campaign and how we're going to implement, where we want to spend our money as we raise it. But again, going back to money, if a candidate's not spending 30, 40, 50% of their time raising money, I would actually submit to you they're not serious about winning.
Well, and the perfect example of several of those things was a good buddy of ours, Matt Krause, who was actually one of the very first guys that came through our training program here in Texas. And when we first met Matt, he was gung-ho to run for Congress, and he wasn't going to hardly raise money, and really just thought he'd win on his first run. And there were some hard truths that we told him right at the beginning. That was, Matt, you're probably going to lose. You need to raise money and you need to run for state house. And if you lose, you need to run again. And sure enough, what happened was he did lose his first race, but he came back and run. And he is since then, I think he's in his third term now, that he's on his way to going into his third term, and absolutely kicking butt down there in the Texas State House because he exercised a little bit of judgment there and was willing to stick with it.
Well, and not only that, Raz, but the ability for Matt to stick around in between election cycles. And I think a lot of guys and gals have this mentality of, if I don't win the first time, well, politics just isn't for me. There are very few people that win in their first time around. But for a Matt Krause, using him as the example, yeah, he ran a great first race. He lost. But what did he do? He spent the next 2 years organizing in that state house district.
He was engaged, not just sitting on the sidelines.
That's correct. And he went out there and he won going away in 2012. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, that if you're going to actually get out there and try and run for office, you can't do it sitting at home. You've got to be out there organizing. You've got to organize in practical ways.
You're exactly right. Now, when it comes to the fundraising, That's where a whole lot of folks stumble. Even the ones that are willing to make the effort and willing to put that big percentage of their time into dollar for dollars and hosting fundraisers, those kind of things, they really end up having a tough time because these are, in many cases, conservative guys, small business owners, doctors, guys that aren't used for asking for money, especially not unless it's in return for hard work. What's your advice for them as they're trying to get their fundraising program started and trying to kind of cut their teeth on that?
I think this is a piece of advice that somebody gave my dad the first time he ran for office is make a list of your friends and family. Give yourself a fundraising number for each one of them. Call, start asking, sharing with them a vision. And I think a lot of candidates, they don't have a fully formed vision of why are you running? And a lot of voters need to know that there's a difference between you, potentially this candidate as a challenger, and the incumbent. You've got to have that locked down. Look, you don't need a 30-minute speech. You need about 2-3 minutes, an elevator speech of, this is what's wrong. This is why I should be your elected official. And here's what I need from you. And then you've got to go and you've got to call and take the temperature of your friends and family. And I tell you what, when we were first given that advice, my dad it seemed a little bit awkward. I mean, how do you call your friends and family? But you'd be amazed at how much money dad raised right out of the gates. And that has been a solid piece of advice that I've used with a lot of first-time candidates. Take out a piece of paper, write down 10, 15, 20 people, and start calling them.
Yeah, in our training program, we cover in the advanced candidate course, we cover fundraising in weeks 2 and 3. And one of the first things we talk about when it comes to raising money is build what we call the Christmas card list. And basically, the kind of people you'd invite to your wedding, your Christmas party, or just send out the update every year. We tell them, hey, put down a number about what you think they can comfortably give, and start thinking about add that up, throw it in Excel, and be able to see exactly what could you raise if you do a good job. And then you start going through that list and seeing what you can raise and trying to see how far along the line of your goal it gets you.
Well, not only that, Raz, but when you get some of these friends and family that are giving, a lot of people forget to ask the next question. Who are 5 people that you can put me in touch with that might potentially match your gift? So that then the candidate can pivot and call them and say, hey, my good friend, your friend, so-and-so just gave me $50. Could you help match that gift? I think fundraising in politics, Raz, it's cyclical and it's also all about momentum. The more you get money rolling in, that snowball effect takes place. But it's hard work. Running for office isn't easy. Obviously, the dividend is you can affect great change, whether it's at the local level or the federal level. But it's not a walk in the park. And that's why I think that it's all the more important that we have really good men and women who are dedicated to this idea of limited government, more freedom, and they want to go out and change what's going on in American politics today. And I think we are seeing in this current election cycle of 2016, a lot of people who are fed up with the status quo. And I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for people that want to run for office the first time. But the first step is putting your hat in the ring, actually deciding this is what you want to do, and then committing to the hard things that it takes to be successful.
No, you're absolutely right. Now, one of the things that you and I constantly get fed up with is especially candidates and consultants looking for silver bullets. That right. One thing that's going to make it to where you don't really have to work hard. You just figure out this one little system and you're golden. And I see that a lot, especially for insurgent congressional candidates. That is the idea of major donor fundraising. And that they can just get a couple of these big donors, the guys that give to everybody, and they're the big names. And if they can just get the buy-in from those guys, that they're golden, instead of doing the hard work on the Christmas card list or trying to cultivate new donors. What kind of advice would you give to those guys as far as how they can really try to cultivate new big donors in their backyard?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I did this year, Raz, is I was one of the principals for the Ted Cruz Super PAC, and I dealt with a lot of these major donors. A lot of them want to see progress by the candidates. And I've had this conversation with a lot of major donors of, hey, there's some great candidates, but how have they done fundraising on their own? There are very few, if any, major donors that basically want to foot the bill for a campaign. They want to come in and they want to be that auxiliary dump of cash, so to speak, that really gives that candidate the winning momentum. But a lot of these donors, they're savvy businessmen and women, and they want to know that the structure is there, the work is being done, and that this campaign actually has a chance of winning. And a lot of it goes back to the elbow grease that the candidate himself or herself is going to put into the race.
Right. They've got to demonstrate that they have the business plan. These are largely businessmen and women who have made a lot of money because they've been savvy when it comes to picking their investments. And it's no different in politics. They got to see that you've got the fundamentals right. and that you're able to go out and get some money and be able to run a good campaign. When you're talking to those donors, what are some of the key indicators they look for? I mean, some fundraising is one. They usually have a dollar amount in mind. What are some of the other ones?
I think they want to know that a poll shows that this race is winnable. In fact, I am sitting looking at a poll numbers, a recent poll and some poll numbers in a race that I really want to be invested in and get some bigger donors invested in. But you know what? I had to know for sure that this race was winnable. And I think that there is a statistics side of politics that they want to see that, yes, our candidate may be 10 or 15 points behind, but there are little things like, I don't know, their name ID is extremely low. And if they have ways to bump their name ID up, well, then that margin closes and this race becomes winnable. So I think statistically, they want to know that these races are winnable. They want to know the candidates can raise money. And frankly, I think they want to see what is the pathway to victory that the candidates have put together. Where are they going to be spending their money? They're going to spend on TV and radio. They're going to be spending it on mail. They're going to be doing the grunt work that I think, and is very valuable, door-to-door work, IDing the right kinds of voters, creating a get-out-the-vote type plan. They want to see, in a sense, and you just referenced it, a prospectus. These people are investors. They're investing in an ideology. They're investing in a free market worldview, if you will say, and they want to know that the products that they're investing in, these candidates, actually have a chance of becoming viable and that they're market ready.
So when it's me, I'm coming to you as you're a big donor, and I'm trying to make this pitch to you as far as why you should invest in your campaign. When I'm making that final pitch, I've got the prospectus. I've been doing some hard work. What is it that brings that home? Is it looking at the hard numbers saying you're $10,000 and buy me this many points in radio or pay for this many door knocks? Is it painting more of a picture of this is my impact in politics? Do you kind of have to do both? What's your take and how do you read that situation?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you have to do both. And I think you have to give the vision to the donors of when I get to, for instance, here in Texas, when I get to Austin, or if at the federal level, when I get to Washington, D.C., I'm not going to become a backbencher. Here are 2 or 3 top ticket items that I'm going to actually work to see implemented or passed in legislation or amendments that I can get pushed through. These are the people that I'm going to hang out with. Nobody wants to invest in, I think, currently the status quo. And that goes to some of these big donors. Obviously, you have some of the big donors that are kind of comfortable with the Republican establishment, the way things that have always been done, in a sense, it's crony capitalism. But you've got a lot of big donors out there that want to change, and they want to know that the people they're investing in will be those agents of change.
I think you're exactly right. It's part of what we teach our guys to do is to try to read the situation as far as whether this person is more of a word picture or a hard facts. Because you and I have both seen the situations where, depending on kind of your personality type, for me, I want to have the hard facts. I want you to come and say, hey, you're $10,000 and pay for X number of doors, which means this many number of votes. I want to know that you've done that electoral math. Whereas somebody else might be, I want this word picture of you standing on the Capitol steps challenging the status quo. Trying to read that as you work in there is important. But in a lot of cases, you just can't. You've got to weave both together and really just moment to moment see what seems to be getting you traction.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got to have the pitch down. And I think a lot of people don't put as much preparation time into the pitch. Believe it or not, Raz, I will actually practice some of my pitches in front of a mirror to make sure that the inflection is there, that when I want to emphasize a certain point of a pitch, look, the donors have to believe that you believe. And if that comes through in the pitch, more often than not, you're walking with a check. And one of the things that I learned early on is start high. You always start high. It's something where you know the number that you really want, but I will oftentimes overshoot it, hoping that at that point I can negotiate a donor into the number that I really need them for. That works I think at a host of levels, whether it's somebody where you need a $1,000 check, but you ask for $5, and $1,000 for them feels like they're off the hook. Or with a really big donor, you need 100,000, but you're asking for 250,000, but you settle for 100,000. There are tactics that you can use, I think, in negotiating and, in a sense, bidding with these big donors. And I think going in and kind of being aware, having some situational awareness in these meetings is critical as you make the pitch as well.
So as the executive director of the Madison Project, you are in a position, like you were just saying a moment ago, where you're looking at these polls and you're making decisions on endorsements, the other PAC leadership. A lot of these candidates that are listening right now and the campaign managers that are advising their guys, they want those endorsements, whether it be from you or from other PACs, because that's those endorsements and the people that are with you early on have a huge impact. All right, Ted Cruz knew that when he came and talked to you very early on. Madison Project was the first PAC to endorse Ted during his Senate run. And so what advice do you have for these candidates that are going and talking to, whether they be conservative interest groups or PACs trying to get donations and endorsements? What kind of preparation should they make, and how should they prepare even before the pitch, as far as their structure and stuff, before they ever worry about talking to the PAC?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the pitch is that different than it is for big donors, because again, you're talking about resources, and PACs will probably ask a lot of the same questions. How's your fundraising? What do the polls look like? What kind of game plan do you have in place? How are you going to implement this game plan? I think the thing too on the flip side is there are some PACs. I mean, look, Madison Project, we'll take some calculated risks. You mentioned Ted Cruz. I had a feeling that if we could get behind this guy, he was going to get into the runoff in 2012. And if he got into a runoff, he was going to beat David Dewhurst. You look at some of these races, we came up just short on Mary Thomas back in August in Florida. But when she and I talked months ago, I went and I talked to some of the other outside groups. I'm like, look, none of you are in at this point. I realized that if the Madison Project endorses, you might not come in. But we've got a good feeling about Mary Thomas, that she's exactly the type candidate that we're looking for. So the Madison Project endorsed Mary Thomas. I think she ended up landing endorsements for like 12 or 13 conservative groups. This is one of the races where the GOP establishment decided to triple down, not just double down. And Mary ended up losing by, I want to say it was like 1,700 votes. That is the type candidate, though, that we're going to have a conversation with and say, hey, don't go anywhere. Spend the next 2 years being active, out speaking to the Republican Women's Club, or finding precincts that potentially you didn't do as well in as you thought you'd have, and start organizing in those precincts. It's nuts and bolts. As you mentioned earlier, there are not any, if any, silver bullets in politics. It's about knowing what to do, how to implement it, and then having the wherewithal to implement it, and being committed to the fact of, I'm going to work as hard as it takes to win, even if that means getting beaten and coming back before I win again.
It definitely takes some incredible tenacity to run. I've never run, don't really intend to, and that's part of why. But I have incredible respect for it and love helping people that are willing to put their name on the ballot. The next step, and you've seen this with your dad and your observations of candidates that you guys have endorsed and helped win. Once they win, and, a lot of times for candidates, it's kind of like the dog catching the car. It's like, what do I do now? It seemed so far off as far as potentially even what they were telling themselves they're going to win. Now they're there, and now they're getting all this outside advice as far as who do I hire, what bills do I file, do I sit on the back bench or do I be aggressive? Give us some thoughts, especially from the DC side, as far as what advice you have for these guys that now they've won, they're looking into their transition period and trying to make sure that they're able to have the right team and provide the right incentive structure around themselves to follow through and actually keep those promises they made on the trail.
I think the biggest thing is plugging yourself into the right crowd immediately. And that is finding the members that have been there for a term or two that have proven themselves to be conservatives. Go hang out with them, pick their brain. For those that have won at the federal level, go meet with the folks at Heritage Action for America and the Heritage Foundation. Plug yourself into the folks that have been there, that have the experience of how Washington, D.C. works, but also are putting forward good ideas that can potentially fix Washington, D.C. And, I send a lot of candidates, prospective or otherwise, or I put them on the phone with folks over at Heritage Action for America, because they understand the policy, what policy is moving, how to actually handle policy. And again, it's not just saying that you're going to go and legislate as a conservative, going and connecting yourself and plugging in with the right kinds of groups. Because here's the thing, you need a good support structure. What's my experience, having viewed from my dad's perspective, as a meat grinder. And if you aren't plugged in and have the right friends and the right allies, the lobbyists, the leadership, you name it, it becomes a pressure cooker. And more often than not, you see what looked like potentially great candidates who won become part of the status quo, or as we say, the swamp, that they become part of this system that they're only continuing to reinforce instead of actually going to change.
Well, and to your point, that those first couple hires say a lot to the supporters. They say a lot. I know that when Cruz was first elected, one of the first things that you and I looked for was who's going to be his chief of staff, who's going to pick for his first chief of staff, and that really sets the tone, especially on that kind of level of political office. And that when we saw Chip Roy got picked, we said, okay, this is the first validation that Cruz is going to be exactly who he said he was going to be in office.
Personnel is policy, and I think That was a critical lesson that my dad learned in Washington, D.C., that there are a lot of times when the elected official, is not in the room and staff are making the decisions for them. And who that staff is matters. And I think a lot of times elected officials, they get there, they don't know which way is up. And the thing that I see a lot of times is the Republican establishment has all these retreads of former chiefs of staff for squishy members, or legislative directors that want to jump up to chief of staff that are in, a squish's office. And they are more than ready to start putting their people inside these offices of conservatives. And before you know it, within a couple of years, I saw this, frankly, it's interesting. Marco Rubio won in 2010. And a lot of us, we endorsed him, and a lot of us had high hopes for Marco Rubio. I have to tell you, though, when you hire somebody like his first chief of staff, a guy named Cesar Conda, that to me said right away that a lot of what Marco Rubio said on the campaign trail was either going to get watered down by a Cesar Conda, who is K Street type lobbyist. Marco Rubio really wasn't being honest with the voters in Florida in 2010. You flip that over to the scenario you just shared of a Chip Roy getting hired by Ted Cruz. Both of those were clear indicators, I think, of which path Marco Rubio was going to take, which led him to the Gang of Eight bill, which I think completely tanked his run for president, versus a Chip Roy who really it was a clear sign from Ted Cruz. I said I was going to do this on the campaign trail, and I'm actually going to hire the personnel that will help me implement this, which is why you saw a Ted Cruz obviously coming up short, but it ended up being Ted Cruz versus Donald Trump. A scenario that nobody, in either sense of the word, really banked on. This was supposed to be a Jeb Bush year, or that, Marco Rubio was the young, attractive new face of the GOP. And yet, Marco Rubio and the staffing hires that he made in 2010 tanked himself with the 2012 Gang of Eight bill. And the Ted Cruz, by these personnel decisions, positioned himself so well that he did something that nobody else expected. He almost became one of the finalists to win the nomination for the GOP.
No, you're absolutely right. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, I want to get a couple of things from you. One, as far as looking at your political experience, either things you've been a part of, helped make happen, or just observed, what's kind of one of your humorous anecdotes or funniest things you've seen happen in politics?
There's a lot. I think going back to that 2002 Missouri race, the U.S. Senate race, Jim Talent versus Gene Carnahan, I had these grandiose visions of coming in, the guy from D.C. was going to do all these things, but I was going to inherit some infrastructure. And I remember walking into the Republican Party headquarters in Joplin, Missouri, and expecting phone banks in a place buzzing with volunteers. And there was one middle-aged woman sitting at a cardboard desk with a rotary phone. And I thought for sure I'd come to the wrong place. And I asked her, I said, "Is this really the Republican Party headquarters?" She's like, "Yes. Have you come to volunteer?" I was like, No. I've come to actually run the volunteers. I'm like, "Where are they?" She's like, "Well, we don't really have any." And you've got to understand, Raz, this is about 3 weeks before the election.
Yeah, this is not far away.
Yeah, this is not what I had envisioned. I called back to D.C., again, my friend Timmy Teeple, and said, "I think there's been a mistake. You have sent me off into the nether regions of politics to die." He's like, "No, there's no mistake. We actually knew the situation in Missouri was flat out terrible, which is why we sent you, because we thought you might be able to do something." I was like, "Remind me that you and I are going to have a conversation when I get back to D.C." We pulled a rabbit out of the hat there. And that was, to me, pretty darn amazing. There are a bunch of other stories that I could tell, but that's the one that, oddly enough, was the first major election that I was involved in that wasn't my dad's. And one of the funnier ones of what we were able to accomplish after that first moment of shock and then digging my way out of it.
Very, very good. And lastly, what's one of your favorite victories or scalps you got to take over the years?
Well, I think definitely the Ted Cruz race, helping be a part to take out David Dewhurst. But then, looking at what you and I have kind of been able to accomplish here in Texas with a Matt Krause, with a Connie Burton and others that we have been intrinsically involved with from the beginning, training them. Bob Hall, who's now a state senator here in Texas as well, training he and Connie and Matt from, let's be honest, they were people that were showing up that really you wouldn't put in the arena of people that could run and win elective office. And yet now here we have Connie Burton in the state Senate, Bob Hall in the state Senate, Matt Krause as one of the rising rock stars in Texas politics, who isn't going to stay in the state house. Who knows where this guy is going to run, what he's going to run for next. And I think the sky's the limit for him. So, I just think those three always jump out to me as something that you and I have been involved with from the very beginning, teaching them the very basics of politics, and now to see them go implement and stay true to their ideology as they operate down in Austin has been, for me, refreshing, but also encouraging in the sense of, hey, if we can do this, not just once, not just twice, 3 times, we can replicate this elsewhere.
Well, Drew, I think that's a wrap. I really appreciate you coming on today. I'm sure we'll talk several other times today and in the very near future. So we'll just have this one recorded. We'll make sure the rest are off the record. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you all later.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from my campaign coach.